It was a cold, moonless night when she decided to walk through the forest alone. The trees towered above her like silent giants, their branches twisting in the wind, whispering secrets she couldn't understand. Every step she took crunched on the dead leaves, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the otherwise silent darkness. Her heart thumped in her chest, each beat echoing the fear she tried to push away. She told herself it was just a forest, nothing more, but the shadows seemed to move with her, stretching and bending as if alive. As she walked deeper, strange sounds began to fill the night. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of unseen creatures, and then a faint whisper calling her name. She froze, flashlight shaking in her hands, trying to see if anyone was there. Nothing, only the forest. She laughed nervously at herself, shaking her head, but the whisper returned, louder this time, closer, like someone was right behind her. She ran, branches slapping her face, roots threatening to trip her, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She stumbled into a small clearing where the moonlight revealed a symbol, carved deep into an old oak tree. The lines were jagged, unnatural, and she felt a chill crawl down her spine. She crouched closer to inspect it, but a sudden snap of a twig made her jump. Turning, she saw nothing, yet the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow made her flinch. She pressed forward, desperate to leave the clearing, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't speak. Then she saw it, a small, abandoned cabin, hidden behind thick overgrowth. The door hung slightly open, creaking as it swayed in the wind. Against her better judgment, curiosity pulled her closer. Inside, dust hung in the air like a fog, and old furniture was draped with tattered cloth. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols she couldn't decipher, and then she saw movement, a dark figure at the window, still as the night. She screamed and ran, the door slamming shut behind her with a force that made her stumble. The forest seemed endless, each step echoing louder than the last. The darkness pressed in, swallowing her whole, and the whispering returned, now all around her. She ran blindly, branches tearing at her clothes and hair, tripping over roots, scratching her hands and arms. The sounds followed her, footsteps, whispers, a laugh that didn't belong to any human child. Panic took over, and she screamed, the sound swallowed by the forest, unheard by anyone. Hours seemed to pass as she stumbled through the maze of trees. Then she came upon a river, moonlight reflecting on the water, making it look calm and inviting. But as she approached, laughter echoed from the other side, hollow and mocking. And then the water rippled unnaturally, and hands reached out, grabbing at her ankles. She screamed, struggling, heart hammering, barely pulling herself free. Her feet sank into the muddy bank as she ran, not daring to look back. Finally, just as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, she saw the edge of the forest. Trembling, bleeding, exhausted, she stumbled out into the open field beyond. She fell to her knees, gasping, and looked back at the forest. In the morning light, it seemed almost innocent, calm and silent, hiding the horrors that had consumed the night. She knew she would never forget the feeling of being hunted, the whispers, the shadows, the forest that came alive when no one was watching. And even as she walked home, she could still hear it faintly calling her name, promising it was not finished with her yet. She ran without direction, branches clawing at her arms and face, the forest seeming to close in around her. Every step felt like the trees themselves were moving, shifting, trying to trap her in their endless maze. The whispering followed her, now a chorus of faint voices, some pleading, some mocking. She didn't dare look back, but a part of her felt eyes on her every second. hidden behind the thick trunks and hanging vines. Her legs burned, her lungs ached, but she couldn't stop. Ahead, the faint glow of fireflies flickered like tiny ghosts, illuminating a narrow path she hadn't seen before. She followed it, hoping it would lead her out, but the path twisted unnaturally, looping back on itself. Panic tightened around her chest. The whispers grew louder, forming words she couldn't quite understand, but their tone was threatening, warning her to turn back. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet became soft, almost like she was walking on a sponge. She stumbled, falling forward into a shallow pit covered with leaves. As she scrambled up, something cold and slimy brushed against her hand. Her scream echoed through the trees. Peering into the darkness, she saw nothing, just the black void of the forest floor. But the sensation of being watched intensified. She stood frozen, shaking, as a shadow moved rapidly between the trees, too fast for her eyes to follow. Her flashlight flickered violently, then went out, plunging her into absolute darkness. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The whispers now felt like they were all around her, circling, closing in. A chill wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something far older, something rotten and alive. She pressed her back against a tree, shivering uncontrollably, trying to make sense of the shapes she could barely see. A branch snapped sharply behind her, and she bolted again, running blindly, barely noticing the mud and water soaking her shoes. Hours seemed to stretch like days. Her mind teetered on the edge of sanity as the forest played tricks on her eyes. Eyes, no, glowing eyes, peered from every shadow. Sometimes she thought she saw a figure standing perfectly still, watching her, only for it to vanish the instant she blinked. Her voice was hoarse from screaming, calling out for anyone at all, but the forest swallowed every sound. Finally, she stumbled into a fog-laden clearing. The air was thick and heavy, each breath feeling like it might choke her. In the center, a dilapidated stone altar, half buried in moss, glimmered under a sliver of moonlight. Strange symbols, etched into the stone, pulsed faintly, as if alive. She felt drawn toward it, a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. Her hands trembled as she touched the cold stone. A sudden, piercing scream erupted from somewhere behind her, and she fell to her knees, spinning around. But the clearing was empty. Only the trees remained, whispering. She forced herself to continue, moving toward what she hoped was the forest's edge. Then she heard it. A child's laughter, soft and melodic, impossibly sweet, yet laced with malice. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Her legs froze, terror rooting her to the spot. She could see faint, almost translucent figures flitting between the trees, faces pale and eyes hollow. The voices called her name again, now in tones she couldn't recognize, pleading and mocking at the same time. She stumbled into a riverbank, the water glimmering like liquid silver under the moon. The surface rippled unnaturally, as if disturbed by unseen hands. And then they appeared, ghostly arms rising from the water, stretching toward her, fingers long and skeletal. She screamed, flailing, barely pulling herself away, and ran along the bank, soaked and shaking, mud and water clinging to her like a second skin. Dawn's first light finally broke through the trees, washing the forest in soft gold. She staggered into the open field beyond, trembling, her body scratched and bruised, her soul exhausted. The forest behind her seemed peaceful, almost innocent, as if nothing had happened. Yet, deep in her chest, she knew better. She could still feel the presence, still hear the faint whispers carried on the wind, promising they were not done with her. And though she kept moving toward home, a part of her could not escape the memory of those glowing eyes, the cold hands from the river, and the forest that had lived and breathed around her that night, waiting, always waiting. It was late at night, and the house was silent except for the soft creaking of floorboards beneath her feet. The air was cold, carrying the faint scent of dust and old wood. She sat on the edge of her bed, a small backpack resting on her lap. Every movement felt heavier than usual, as if some unseen force was holding her back. Her hands trembled as she packed a flashlight, a water bottle, and a small notebook, each item a fragile shield against the unknown she was about to face. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, painting long, distorted shadows across the room. Her own shadow stretched across the walls, twisting unnaturally, and for a moment she thought she saw it move independently of her. She shivered and shook her head, trying to convince herself it was just a trick of the light. She glanced at the door, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. The forest waited outside, dark and silent, a place where stories of disappearances and strange occurrences haunted the whispers of the town. And yet, despite every warning she had ever heard, she had made up her mind. She had to see it for herself. Her heart thumped loudly, echoing in her ears as she slipped her jacket on, the fabric rustling softly. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in her hands, and picked up the backpack. Each step toward the door felt surreal, as though she were moving through water. She paused at the threshold, listening. Every creak of the house sounded louder in the stillness, and she imagined figures watching her from the shadows. Finally, summoning every ounce of courage, she opened the door. A rush of cold air greeted her, carrying with it the sense of damp earth and pine from the forest beyond. The darkness outside seemed thicker than the night inside, almost tangible, pressing against her like a living thing. She stepped out, the ground cold and uneven beneath her shoes. Her flashlight in hand, she cast its beam ahead, slicing through the black, illuminating only fragments of the forest floor and the first twisted branches. The house behind her faded into the shadows, becoming nothing more than a dark silhouette against the night sky. She could hear the distant hum of the town, faint and comforting, but it felt impossibly far away. The forest called to her, a place of mystery and danger, its secrets hidden in the depths of darkness. She swallowed hard, forcing her fear into the corners of her mind, and began walking toward the unknown. Every step she took made the forest seem more alive. The wind whispered through the leaves, creating voices she could almost understand. Her shadow followed her, stretching along the path in strange, unnatural ways. She kept her eyes on the dimly lit trail, her flashlight flickering as if warning her of the dangers ahead. The trees leaned over, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for her. Her mind raced, imagining every horror that might lie ahead. Every story she had heard as a child came alive in that moment. The whispers in the woods, the unseen eyes, the feeling of being watched. She pressed on, trying to focus on the small circle of light in front of her, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. The forest seemed endless, even at the very edge where she had first stepped into it. Shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense, forming shapes that disappeared the moment she tried to look directly at them. She felt her heartbeat pounding in her chest, each thump a warning and a reminder that she was utterly alone. She whispered to herself a mantra to push back the fear. It's just a forest, nothing more. And yet, every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an owl, the snapping of twigs, made her flinch. The darkness seemed to thicken, swallowing the light of her flashlight in patches, creating pockets of inky black where she couldn't see. She realized that the forest wasn't just trees and soil. It was alive, watching, waiting, as if it knew she had come alone. She stopped for a moment, crouching down to adjust her backpack, the straps digging into her shoulders. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and she had to take a deep breath to steady herself. The forest loomed around her, silent yet oppressive, a world that existed parallel to the safety she had left behind. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back, but she couldn't. Curiosity, stubbornness, and the need to face the unknown pushed her forward. With one last glance at the house silhouetted behind her, she tightened the straps of her backpack and stepped onto the path leading deeper into the forest. The trees towered above her like silent sentinels, and a chill ran down her spine as the wind whispered through the branches. Her shadow flickered in the pale moonlight, twisting and dancing with every movement, a reminder that the night had only just begun. The moment she stepped off the familiar path and into the forest, a shiver ran down her spine. The air grew colder, heavier, as if it carried the weight of 1,000 silent eyes. The trees loomed over her, gnarled and ancient, their twisted branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal arms, casting shadows that seemed to move even when the wind was still. The forest floor was uneven, tangled with roots and fallen branches, and each step she took caused leaves to crunch loudly, sounding alarmingly close as though someone, or something, was following her. Her flashlight cut a narrow beam through the darkness, illuminating only fragments of the path ahead. The rest of the forest seemed to swallow the light, a black void punctuated by the faint glimmer of distant moonlight. The fog had thickened, curling around the base of the trees and wrapping her legs in a damp embrace. Every breath she took seemed louder than the last, and she could hear the rapid beating of her own heart echoing in the still night. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination. Stories she had grown up hearing about the haunted forest were nothing more than folklore. Tales meant to scare children into staying close to home. But the deeper she walked, the less she believed that. The forest was alive. She could feel it. The subtle movement of shadows, the soft rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind that sounded eerily like voices. A twig snapped somewhere to her right, and she froze. The beam of her flashlight darted in that direction, but there was nothing. Just the dark, twisting shapes of the trees, silent and still, or so it seemed. Her pulse quickened, and she realized she could hear faint whispers. Low, indistinct, almost melodic, but they sent chills down her spine. Her own name, or something like it, whispered between the branches. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back, but her feet moved forward, almost against her will. Each step made the forest seem more oppressive, the shadows thicker, the air heavier. She thought she saw a figure in the distance, barely visible through the fog. It didn't move like a normal person. It was still but impossibly tall, and its silhouette shifted unnaturally. She blinked, and it was gone. The sounds around her grew louder. The distant hoot of an owl sounded closer, more urgent. Leaves rustled as if something large was moving just out of sight. The whispers circled her, coming from all directions, low and menacing. She clutched her flashlight tighter, the beam shaking with her trembling hands. Her legs ached, but she dared not stop. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and decay. She stumbled, nearly falling, and when she looked up, the path ahead seemed different. Shapes that had been trees moments ago now looked like figures leaning toward her, their branches resembling long, reaching fingers. Shadows danced in the corners of her eyes, vanishing when she tried to focus on them. She forced herself to breathe slowly, whispering to herself like a prayer, "It's just a forest." Nothing more, just trees. But even as she said it, the whispering voices seemed to mimic her words, twisting them into something cruel, mocking her attempt at courage. She could feel eyes watching her from the darkness, hundreds of unseen creatures hiding, waiting, stalking her every move. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, and then went dim. Panic surged through her chest, hot and suffocating. She swung it frantically, trying to illuminate her surroundings. And for a moment she thought she saw faces, pale, hollow-eyed faces glimmering between the tree trunks before vanishing into the fog. She screamed, her voice swallowed instantly by the dense night. Branches reached out, brushing against her arms and face, as if the forest itself wanted to hold her back. The whispers became louder, forming words she could almost understand. Turn back, leave, never, but she couldn't. She had to keep moving, had to know what lay ahead, though every instinct begged her to flee. The path twisted, leading her into a small clearing. The moonlight broke through the trees here, illuminating the ground in pale silver. At the center of the clearing, she noticed something carved into the earth. Faint lines etched in patterns that made no sense to her mind. The air grew colder, the fog thickened, and the whispers intensified, surrounding her in a suffocating embrace. She could feel her heartbeat echoing in her ears, each pulse a reminder that she was utterly alone in a forest that was anything but empty. A sudden snap behind her made her whirl around. Nothing, only the shadows, stretching and bending in impossible ways. Her flashlight flickered again, the beam cutting through the mist just enough to reveal the twisted, claw-like branches leaning closer, as if the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting. She swallowed hard and pressed forward, every nerve on edge, knowing that the night had only begun, and that whatever lurked in the darkness was far from finished with her.